All right, here we go. Let's make sure I can talk. Let's make sure of that first. And let's make sure that we are indeed live. I believe that we are. I hate when other people do this when they're like, "Oh, let me make sure I'm live." And then I find myself doing that lately. So, let's indeed be sure. Yes, we are. All right. So, we are going to go over part two of what we started last week with the report on what has happened in Georgia with their absolutely, um, really just horrifying issue within foster care centers, foster care providers, advocates, foster care homes. There's a lot going on with that whole situation. So we're going to go over part two. We're going to recap what we had going on last week. And this week we're going to give you a little bit more information on what there was a lot more I had to go over and just we didn't have time for it last week. So I am looking very much forward to finishing that up. We're going to give you some more context, some more stories about how all of this happened in Georgia and how it all breaks down. There's a lot to it. You can put numbers on a page and say here's the numbers and here's who's been affected and here's what's happening. Um, but you really need to break that down and understand exactly step by step how this is happening. So one of the biggest issues, of course, within most foster care providers, but within Georgia, the biggest amount of complaints that come into foster care are neglect. And when that neglect is not properly assessed, properly investigated, properly treated going forward, for all parties involved, the parent and child, and what is done in the interim of that situation, that's where the breakdown occurs. If it's not properly investigated, not properly taken care of in the process, um, whatever happens, that's where the breakdown is, and that's why it's important that these policies that are put in place for foster care for DFCS in Georgia, that they are followed. It's very important because there's lives on the other side of that. So we're going to get into that today. I'm going to do a little bit of a recap on what we talked about last week, and then we're going to get into some stories. I know that a lot of people in the missing persons advocate community and overall nationally, and then there's a lot of people in Georgia as well locally who all know about Quentin Simon. Quentin Simon is a boy that disappeared, a toddler that disappeared from Georgia, from Chatham County, and a lot of people know about his case. Now it's really concerning to see that people who have claimed to advocate for Quentin Simon have been really quiet about this report. So I hope that more people will start talking about it as well because he is in fact one of the children that was affected by these policies not being properly followed. Um, the actual breakdown of the Quentin Simon situation was he was reported missing, and come to find out, it was not too long after the investigation was opened into his disappearance that the law enforcement did not believe that he had truly disappeared, but rather that his family knew what happened to him. And they were correct about that. They ended up finding his part of his remains. They found proof. We'll say that for now. They found proof that he was in fact deceased and that he was in the local landfill. Now, the follow up to that whole situation has been that his mother is she is incarcerated, awaiting trial, trying to get as much thrown out of her case as possible moving forward because she knows she's cooked when in this whole matter. A jury is not going to look at the fact that part of your, that there's proof of your child being found in a landfill and you skate on that no matter what the lack of evidence might be in that case. It's she's cooked. Now what happened before all of that is that she was found to be neglectful, There were other findings. I'm not going to get into all of that right now, but there were other findings also related to her care of her child. So he was removed, and they allowed for him to go and live with his grandmother. Now, a lot of people already know this story, and you know how it ended, and you know how it was improperly investigated. But this is his case is a part of these numbers that we have been talking about. So they didn't properly investigate whether or not he should really even be with his grandmother, but it was an easy place to put him. He was taken out of his home. He needed a place to go, and they likely didn't have a place to put him. So he went with his grandmother, who was arguably not a safer option than his mother in any kind of way. So, and his mother still had regular access to him, which was, also a problem, and what led to him being murdered, allegedly, because that has not completely moved through the court system yet. But that is one of the few cases that we have that we can pretty much say we know where this is going to end. Now, another situation within the Georgia foster care system that has been kind of has it has been reported on, but it hasn't got enough attention. There are a lot of situations where children were taken out of their homes. They were in a neglectful situation that led to abuse, and that's how a lot of this happens. You have neglect that spirals out into abuse eventually, especially when it goes unchecked or when there is poverty involved. There's a lot of factors there to just sum it up into one general statement. However, a lot of the children who were removed from their homes and needed a place to go, and they had no place to go, i.e., there was no foster parent, there was no group home, there was nowhere to put these children that were being taken out. Um, so basically, they put these children in hotels. We talked a little bit about this last week, but I don't know if it really sunk in with everyone exactly what I was saying. They put these children in hotels. Some of these children have since testified to the abuse they endured while being housed in hotels by DFCS all over the state of Georgia. Some of these children have talked about horrific things that have happened to them. Now, we're not into trauma erotica over here, so we don't get into all the gore and the heinous details. We try not to celebrate that too much. There are times that we bring it up for educational purposes, but otherwise we try to stay away from it. These aren't horror films. This is supposed to be education on how to intervene in situations, how to see something and say something, how to know when to say something, how to be able to understand crime, how it happens, how it spirals out. All of this stuff being reported on in what is called true crime. It should all be with an emphasis of victim and survivor focused reporting and education, because we learn from these things. We learn from these behaviors. So anyways, these children have really been through a lot, and these are just the ones we know about that testified. There's a lot we don't know about that happened inside those hotel rooms across the state of Georgia. Georgia was told many times and finally complied with the fact that they needed to stop housing children in hotel rooms. So you can look at the response from DFCS. You can look at the report that was generated by the subcommittee, and then you can look at the children. And like with any other situation, there are three sides to every story. The report is saying that the numbers are bad. Things are bad in Georgia when it comes to foster children and ensuring the safety of children within the state in general, because these investigations into child safety are not being thoroughly done. 84% of cases in DFCS in Georgia are said to be improperly investigated. And that usually that means, they didn't walk an extra 10 feet into the house to make sure that they could see the child and see that they were okay, when in fact, if they would have, they would have seen the child was not okay. Little situations like that. We're not talking about big technical loopholes, gray areas, difficult situations. No, we're talking about basic stuff. You were sent to a home to check on a child's welfare. You took the parent's word for it instead of walking an extra 10 feet into the home to ensure the child's welfare. And if you had, you would have found that child in a very bad situation. Those are the kinds of things I'm talking about. So there's three sides to this story. That would be the report. Then you have DFCS is saying, but look at all of the numbers we've improved. Look at the fact that we stopped housing children in hotels, which we never should have been doing in the first place. But um, they say that the stories about the report are being slanted, and some of them are, but mostly in ways of people are saying nearly 2,000 children were reported missing when it's 1,700 and some children were reported missing within DFCS. Um, they're saying that there's not actual proof of the numbers of the children that have been trafficked while in the care of DFCS. And that's true. They are projections, but these projections are based on a lot of factors, and they tend to be pretty close to accurate. So uh, these are very lame excuses. The DFCS director has done nothing but try to defend the bad numbers, the bad behavior, the lack of proper following of the policies. They're not following their own process, and they know that, and they're just trying to defend that. They don't really care about addressing the problem, it seems. And then you have the story of the children, and they have told their own stories. They testified at the subcommittee. They have testified in cases when it is in relation to the children being held in hotel rooms. There have been multiple cases and situations where these children have testified to what they've endured. And let me just tell you, their stories are even more heinous than the numbers. Um, so that's highly difficult. So let's look at something really quickly, just to recap what we've already gone over last week, and then we're going to get into the actual other stories that we haven't even talked about yet. Let's see here. So, just to recap, this is what we went over last week. The report that was put together by the subcommittee, um, it went over a lot of human rights violations within the division, the Georgia Division of Family and Child Services, also known as DFCS. The report details failures in the form of compliance violations, child neglect, a failure to report most of the basic tasks that it takes to ensure the safety of a child that has been reported as being in possible danger. The failure the failures basically they paint a picture of how children in the care of the state of Georgia have suffered injuries as a result of physical abuse. Um, the physical abuse also extends to human trafficking and death. Sometimes that's in the form of neglect, sometimes that's in the form of actual murder. We've seen both happen in cases in Georgia that have gone unchecked by DFCS. Some of them were active open cases, even that DCF was monitoring. And still, they did not do the proper things that they had in place and follow their own policies to ensure that child had a good outcome. Now, like I mentioned before, DFCS is claiming that other states have higher rates of children missing from foster care, that their numbers aren't as bad as other people, that some of these numbers are just a projection. Um, and that's, it's not, they're saying it's not actual evidence of any case in Georgia. The report itself accuses the director, Candace Brose, of asking her department to strongly defend their failures. And let me tell you, we have started our own research and investigative project into that as well. Candace Bryce is a very interesting person, let's just say. I encourage anybody to check into that as well. The report brings up failures that have widely affected their community, including the details of the case of missing child Quentin Simon, who is believed to have been killed by his mother after DFCS failed to ensure compliance in his case prior to his disappearance. It also details other instances of child neglect and death. The failure to be in compliance in the case of missing Quentin Simon costed Chatham County funds that they did not have. $250,000 had to be allocated from their. They had a program they were working on getting funds together for. It was for their school zone camera fund. They had to take $250,000 from that school zone camera fund, and put it towards the investigation for Quentin Simon. Now, that's a big deal because the failures of DFCS now trickle over into counties when things like this happen. Let's say that we have another situation pop up in Chatham County where a school zone camera would have maybe saved a life there. And they weren't able to do that because DFCS did not properly investigate and ensure that Quentin Simon was in a safe home with a safe caregiver and away from the person that he was deemed to not be in the care of, a person that was deemed to be a threat to him. And clearly that was true because of how things ended. Violations within the foster care system in Georgia have existed for many years. This is not a new thing. The Health and Human Services initiated, the Health and Human Services Department, they initiated a program improvement plan for Georgia in 2017. The plan was initiated to address failures that were endangering the lives of vulnerable children in Georgia. And a representative from Health and Human Services testified that Georgia failed to complete the plan. For this report in 2023, they testified that they failed to complete this report. They failed to acknowledge that any of these steps even needed to be taken. And in the past, anytime they've been reprimanded for their really horrifying numbers or situations that were happening within DFCS, they have always ignored the numbers, the recommendations, the plans going forward to correct those numbers. They just act like it's not even there, doesn't even exist. Failing to comply with these requirements has resulted in child abuse. It's resulted in neglect, death. Like I said, there are so many situations that this results in. Over 100 witnesses and sources appeared at the public hearing to testify about their knowledge of the inner workings of DFCS based on their experiences in order to make this report in 2023. Families, juvenile court representatives, a court judge, juveniles who were held in detention. Now, get this, they held not only juveniles in hotel rooms and abused them, but they also held them in detention centers, juvenile detention centers, and would not allow them to be released because they didn't have anywhere for them to go. So there was also testimony about that. There was testimony from the FBI, from Homeland. The testimony was across the map. Families who have been affected by DFCS in situations where their children shouldn't have been removed, but they were. And then you had situations where the child had a bad outcome. I mean, you've got parents that are willing to come forward in front of a court and saying, yeah, I was a crap parent and I shouldn't have done the things that I did. And when the state took my child to put them in a better situation, it only got worse. And now my child isn't even here today. Like it's just a very, very devastating situation all around. So in the report, we highlighted several things. The investigation validates reports that DFCS failed to meet basic standards that prevent children from experiencing abuse and death. Nearly 2,000 children were reported missing while in the care of DFCS. Approximately 410 children were possible victims of sex trafficking based on a projection by the NCMEC. So the NCMEC did the projections for them. And trust me, there's a lot that goes into that. A lot of the more thorough work that the NCMEC does is at the direction of the FBI. Juvenile court judges testified that DFCS improperly held juveniles in detention centers. Only 13% of cases received adequate mental and behavioral health needs. What's really hard to swallow about that is that they also were found to be guilty of, I mean, I shouldn't say it that way. It didn't happen in a criminal court, but they also found cases where children were being over medicated in order to control their behaviors or just control their overall activity. Um, that's hard to accept when, on the other hand, you have only 13% of children within DFCS who need mental health care that get it. Even worse than that, only 40% of children in the care of DFCS received proper medical care and dental care. I'm talking about basic appointments, basic follow-up visits, routine things that children do, before school every year and things like that. The mental and physical health care for children in the care of DFCS has rapidly declined ever since 2015, when it was roughly around 29%. It just goes down from there. So that's the overall combined mental and physical health care. The report accuses DFCS of dismissing previous reports that revealed systemic child safety failures, and it absolutely does. And DFCS is not responding, other than the few comments that they made initially that, other states have higher numbers and these aren't real numbers. Well, the only number that isn't real, or is a projection, is the stuff that's based off of children who are possibly trafficked from DFCS. And then there's also, I had another point I wanted to mention too. What was it? I'm not remembering now what it was. Anyhow, so let's go over and let's check out some of these stories really quick. And I'll try to get some things up here on the screen for everybody too, so that you're not just having to look at the icon. I know some people appreciate the video when we have the video up as well. So we're going to share one story really quickly because it's close to the Valdosta area in Lowndes County. We have shared this story before. It is absolutely atrocious. And we're going to share it again because she used to work for DFCS. She also used to be instrumental in adoptions in the Lowndes County area. There's a lot of questions I have about this woman. And I hope to get more of them answered at some point. Everyone in the Lowndes County area should be aware of this woman, even though she is now locked up for the rest of her life, as she got sentenced to 119 years. Everybody should be aware of this, if for nothing else, just to know that this happens in the area. Okay, so this is her right there, Amelia Spires. So she's from the Cook County area, but let me tell you, we've done some homework on her and we have found plenty of proof of her being very active in the Lowndes County area and involved with adoptions there, involved with foster care, DFCS programs. So she was arrested, though, and charged in Cook County. So it says here, Cook County woman is facing 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, followed by an additional 69 years in prison. According to the Alpala, I don't know what that is, Judicial Circuit District Attorney Chase Studstill, on Wednesday, February 14th, Amelia Spires, 47 years old, pled guilty to 4 counts of aggravated battery. It's of the SA nature. We're really trying not to get YouTube to absolutely hate us here, even though when most people get to know me, they're going to hate me eventually, but we would like for YouTube to stay on our side as long as possible, and YouTube hates all the words we use, so it's fun. Anyhow, after Spires entered her plea, she was sentenced by Judge Perryman, who heard arguments from both the state and the defense regarding the sentence. Law enforcement officers with the FBI, the GBI, and the Cook County Sheriff's Office assisted in the investigation. There's not a lot of information that's given directly in this report, but there's not a lot of information to share about this case because it has to do with children and horrible things that this woman did to them. These are SA child related crimes. Um, I'm in order to respect the victims in this case, who are also survivors. I'm not going to go into any more of the gore that this woman inflicted on children. However, she was an employee of DFCS. She was sentenced, and this just happened this year. So her case came up in 2023, and then she was officially sentenced very early this year. So this is a very recent story. And that is just absolutely horrific. She was caring for children who were not hers. And it's really horrific to think that you don't get heavy sentences in Georgia for abusing children, even when the abuse gets pretty gory and graphic. And just heinous. You don't tend to get long sentences. So keep that in mind. This woman got 2 consecutive life sentences plus another 69 years tacked on. She's pretty horrendous. So let's go down here. Oh, yeah. And she also, that's right. I was just reminded that she also used to work for DFCS in Valdosta. So that was why she was so active there too. I forgot to mention that. Thank you. We've got the best fact checkers. I love it. They keep me on track here. There's always so much information in these cases, and even if you remember it all, like it's just so hard to remember to say it all. Okay, so it's just awesome. We have great help. Let's pull up another article here. And these stories are just very, very difficult. I'm going to show you another one here. Sorry that I'm a little bit slow here tonight. It's been a long week. We're going to show you Mr. Roy Payne. Seems to be appropriately named. We'll put his ugly mug up on the screen for everybody. That is Mr. Roy Payne, also a former employee of DFCS. And you can see the little handcuffs there next to his picture if you're looking at video, which pretty much tells the story. So he was formerly an employee, like I said, of DFCS, and he was in the Northwest Georgia area. He was then charged with severely harming several children that were in his care. The GBI agents arrested him. He was, like I said, charged with 3 counts of abuse, 3 counts of these 2 things right here on the screen that we won't repeat because we don't really want to go to YouTube jail. I don't know if we can see those really well. You guys can let me know on the back end if these need to be zoomed in a little bit for everybody to read the text better when we're sharing articles. I have a feeling we probably need to do that. So he is, at the time of this, which was reported in April of 2023, he was in custody at the Gordon County Jail, and anyone with information at the time was asked to call the GBI. Another situation of these are the people that are being hired and tasked with caring for children in the Georgia foster care system. These are it, folks. Amelia Spires, the woman that we just had on the screen. She's a woman. A lot of people probably would have thought that their child would be safer. They're with a female. And then we have this man. There's no telling what all he has done to children. There's no telling what all Amelia did to children that nobody ever found out about. Because typically these people are doing this stuff for a very long time before they actually get caught. And that's why it's funny when people say that sexual offenders are not usually repeat offenders. No, they are some of the worst repeat offenders. So, Roy Payne, another shining example of the people that they are employing through the DFCS system there in Georgia. So let's pull up another one here. Also, 4 years ago, I don't know if people in the Georgia area remember this, but 4 years ago ish, there was a case of a foster parent being given I think it was 3-year-old twins to take care of that were removed from their home, and the foster parent left the 3-year-old twins in a car, and they in a hot car, um, and they passed away in that hot car. It, you would think of all people who knows not to leave children in a vehicle would be a DFCS worker. You know, these people know that there are certain people in the community who know who they are, that know that they're in the care or that they're caring for foster children and that they can easily be reported for this behavior. You would think, if nothing else, the overarching fear of getting caught doing these things would stop them, but it just doesn't. Okay, let's pull up this other one here. So this is another female. Let's pull her up on the bigger screen for everybody. Christina Queen. And you can look these stories up yourself. I mean, that's why I'm saying all the details here, because I hope that people do look these stories up. It's absolutely horrifying that this happens. Here we go. All right, let's put this up on the screen for everybody. So these folks right here, and this was back in 2019, just so that everybody knows. Those faces right there that are up on the screen right now, this is from Fannin County, Georgia. A mother and a former Division of Family and Child Services officer was arrested after accusations of a deal to sell a child for a car. Yeah. The GBI investigation said 19-year-old Christina Queen agreed to sell her baby to William and Rebecca McLean in exchange for a 2006 Jeep Grand Cherokee. They're getting a Jeep. Rebecca McLean is a former DFCS employee. According to the arrest warrant, the couple encouraged Queen to make the deal for the child at their Blue Ridge home in late June. The McLeans and Queen were booked into the Fannin County Jail facing felony charges. The child is reportedly where? In foster care. Well, I mean, like, this is the last stop for any child that's in a really bad situation. This is the last step. There's nowhere else to put a child. And even DFCS apparently doesn't have anywhere to put a child. So this is the last stop, and this child is in the care of a former. I mean, wrap your head around this, folks. This child's in the care of a DFCS worker. That worker tries to sell that child for a vehicle, and then they end up in the care of DFCS. This stuff is horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous. But those three folks right there are the folks that were arrested for this really horrific crime. Okay, let's go to our next one. We've got like 41 people in here tonight. I appreciate everybody joining us to listen to these horrible details and go over this information. This is important whether you are local in the Valdosta area, in Georgia, or you are an advocate in the missing persons community or otherwise. These are important things to know, the breakdown of this and how this does and doesn't work, because they are really um, there are things that are highly important that need advocacy, or it's not going to change. Clearly, not making a lot of noise hasn't helped anything for these children. We're going to pull up this next one. Hang on just a second. Oops. If I would be over here clicking on the right buttons, we would be able to get this up a whole lot faster. Okay. So, let's put this one up on the screen for everybody because it is another awful one. They're all awful. I say that, but they're all awful. Let's scroll down here. Here we go. We found it. Yeah, again, I just really appreciate everybody who's been showing up for this. The numbers are growing slowly. We like to do it organically. We don't want to push the numbers any more than the people who organically want to show up for this information. So 800 Georgia DFCS workers were disciplined for violations back in 2019. It's not been all that long ago. We're talking like 5 years ago. And as we can see, since 2019, 2015, really, the numbers have not gotten better. They've only gotten worse and been taking a nosedive in a lot of different areas. There's a few areas they have improved, like not housing children in hotels. But aside from that, the numbers have only gone down, not up. The Reveal investigators uncovered records showing more than 40% of caseworkers who had disciplinary issues in the last 4 years at the Georgia Division of Family and Child Services were either negligent or ineffective or inefficient in performing their assigned duties. It's a startling statistic for an agency responsible for keeping Georgia's at-risk children safe. One Metro family is calling for changes. The agency promised years ago that they, oops, we just lost our article. Hold on a second. That they could have prevented their little girl's death. Imani Ross, October 2013. She died October 2013. She was 10 years old when she was beaten and starved by her stepmother, Tiffany Moss. Moss was convicted in her case and sentenced to death in May. So this would have been back in 2019 again. Imani's paternal grandmother, Robin Moss, is now one of several families suing DFCS for negligence and wrongful death. I called DFCS. They knew about her case, and they did nothing about it. Failures in Imani's case forced a series of changes at DFCS to try and make kids safer. But 6 years, millions of dollars, and 3 new agency directors later, now this was in 2019, and there's yet another new one now. The Reveal agency has uncovered records showing more than 2 in every 5 case workers have violated state policy, potentially putting children in danger. So 2 out of every 5 caseworkers are found, there's proof that they are not following protocols, policies, safety plans. Between January of 2013 and August of 2018, more than 800 employees assigned to Child Protective Services were disciplined. The agency tells 11 Alive it has a total of 1,900 caseworkers. Some of the disciplinary actions taken were for minor policy violations, but about 14% of the caseworkers disciplined falsified a record or lied about checking on a child in custody. And that's where the big breakdown happens, is when children, they're reporting that they did these reports, they did these investigations, they checked on the welfare of a child, when in fact they really didn't. They might have just pulled in the driveway, tried to knock on the door, didn't get an answer, and thought, we're checking it off. Wilcott is the former director of the Office of the Child Advocate, an oversight office for DFCS. You call this data frightening? With a question mark. What kind of people take on the job that specifically is designed to help children, to protect children, and then don't go visit a child or falsify documents or don't keep their records? The basics, those things, to me, I cannot comprehend. Same here. I can't comprehend it either. The records obtained by the Reveal under Georgia's open records law also show that in at least 2 cases, the caseworker's action resulted in a child's death. And this is before Quentin Simon. This is before a lot of children that have died recently. The agency wrote the following in a caseworker's files: work performance and neglect and inefficiency, failure to make contact with a home visit with 5 foster children when they entered DFCS custody. One of the children died before they were ever seen. The child died after it was taken out of its home that was declared to be a bad situation, died while in foster care, and no one from DFCS other than that home they were placed in had eyes on them. Not once. Then in March of 2014, another caseworker was written up for negligence in the performance of assigned duties, failure to give a staff member clear and accurate guidance on a case which resulted in a child death. And also, I just want to add the trajectory of homicide and murder, with murders and negligent death becoming an issue within foster care. You may say, well, there are not as many cases of children dying as there are of the general neglect. Of course, but the general neglect and the policies not being followed is what leads to the death. And the deaths are a sign of, you need to assess the policies and see if they're being followed, because clearly there's a breakdown somewhere. So when you start getting these homicides and negligent deaths that come up with children, then you're supposed to go back to the drawing board and look at everything and look at the numbers and say, okay, what's happening that this is becoming an issue? You don't want a pile up of these cases turning out to have an ending like this. These endings are red flags that you have big problems that need to be addressed, or you're going to have more endings like this. So the people that claim to advocate for Quentin Simon need to remember that. You need to remember that if you want any type of change in this whole situation and why everything happened the way that it did for that child, then you have to look at these numbers. You have to call out the issues that are happening in Georgia. Many of the DFCS errors were on display during the July trial of Joseph and Jennifer Rosenbaum. The couple was convicted in the death of their 2-year-old. The prosecutor said, I want to be clear, on November the 2nd, did you on, okay, never mind. I'm not going to go over that. Yeah, there's just certain things that we don't want to get into. We don't want this to be about the gore of it all. In another exchange during court proceedings, a DFCS supervisor suggested the couple shouldn't have been allowed to foster Daniels in the first place. The prosecutor, so the home evaluation, was that signed in this case? Did it go through the proper process? The supervisor's response, no, there were concerns. They didn't, my staff did not screen Miss Rosenbaum's maiden name, and had she been screened properly and thoroughly, her maiden name, her foster care history would have come up, and I would not have approved her on that alone. So they're not even doing thorough checks into their employees when they hire them. Clearly, you could see some of the other people that I've pulled up this evening, really horrific people that are being hired in, people that it should be clear um, on the surface that a lot of these people should not be in contact with children. So those are some of the things I wanted to go over, and I wanted to just recap some of the details. I know that there was a lot of ranting last week, um, so I just wanted to recap the details in a more clear, concise way for everyone, and also bring up some of these stories. I know we've mentioned Quentin a lot tonight, but there are so many other children that have lost their life in the Georgia foster care system when they were supposed to be protected by people who were already putting their life in danger in one way or another. Sometimes it wasn't even a situation, and here's where it's really hard. Sometimes it's not a situation of the child being removed for neglect, but rather a parent coming forward to the state and saying, I am in a really bad situation and I need help. Sometimes it's because of poverty. Sometimes it is because of domestic violence. A mental health issue can come into play. There are medical issues that can come into play in a situation like that where somebody may not have anyone else to turn to. They have a child that they have to care for. They try to do the right thing and make sure that someone can care for their child while they deal with what they need to deal with, and this is the outcome. I mean, a lot of people that move through the foster care situation, the foster care system, end up in situations like this because they don't have family to fall back on. So if they get in a bad situation, who do they have to fall back on? Unless they form those relationships over time after aging out of the system. Otherwise, they have nobody to fall back on if they get into a difficult spot. So in a situation like that, a family or a person has to turn to DFCS for their help. And then they go to get their child back and they can't because their child's gone. Maybe there's something happened to them in the care of foster care, and um, maybe something, what I was going to say is maybe something happened to them while in the care of foster care, or maybe they're just simply unaccounted for, because when you've got almost 2,000 children that have been reported missing, and here's the other thing, foster care is supposed to report those missing children to the NCMEC so that they can be listed through the NCMEC. And the way that that report is worded, it sounds to me like that's also not happening. That's another way for them to try to hide the numbers. So yeah, I don't mind saying when your numbers are 1,700 and some, I don't mind saying almost 2,000 because we really don't know how many there are. So I leave you with all of that horrifying information, those cases. I think those are all the cases I'm going to bring up. There are many, many more former workers of DFCS who have not only been fired, but also convicted and tried through the criminal court system. And that is hard to do in Georgia sometimes. So that should just tell you how bad those cases were. But we're going to let this rest here. We're going to continue on with other topics that we need to get into in the coming week. And we hope that other people will advocate for this and keep these numbers in mind, keep the children that are missing in Georgia in mind, the children who are in foster care, and try to advocate for better policies and better follow through from DFCS in Georgia. And if you are an advocate of Quentin Simon, I encourage you to make sure that you look at these numbers and show up and let your voice be heard where it matters, because this is his legacy now. And this is a huge issue in Georgia that needs to be addressed. So I thank everybody for joining us tonight. I appreciate it. We've got almost 50 people listening tonight. That doesn't seem like a lot of numbers overall in the big scheme of things, but we're a new channel and I appreciate it. Appreciate everybody that comes out to listen to me rant about horrifying things, both in and out of the Lowndes County area. We're going to get back to Lowndes next week. We're next week for our Valdosta Live. We're going to go over our resource panel and share with people what we have built there, what is available to people in Valdosta as far as help. I think the first one will focus on resources for people that are in need of a little bit of, a little bit of food, a little extra help, some financial assistance. Maybe you're a victim of a crime, you need to know where to go in that type of situation. There's a lot of resources we have in there. We'll also get to the more fun stuff. We've got a lot of different things. We're also highlighting on that resource page the active ongoing investigations in Valdosta so that everybody is aware of those things. And if you happen to know something about one of those cases, please go forward with that information. There are a lot of families in Valdosta that are waiting for justice, and they've been really, really patient. So we'll also remind everybody, if there are local listeners tonight, that Paula and Brandon Wade are still missing from the Georgia area. That's what we're going to end with tonight. Let's pull up their picture for everyone. Paula and Brandon Wade disappeared in October of 2002. Let's pull up their FBI file for everybody. Their case this past year was taken up by the FBI. So now you can call the FBI in Atlanta, their field office there, to report information that you may have about Paula and Brandon. Paula was last seen leaving work at Sam's Club in Valdosta in 2002 on October the 12th, I believe it was. And that weekend, at some point in that weekend from Friday to Monday, which would have been the 14th, Paula and Brandon both disappeared. It was not revealed that they disappeared until Monday morning when Paula did not show up for work. The first indication was that she missed a very important phone call. I wouldn't say, I mean, it's an important phone call, but it was a consistent phone call that she always had with her parents. Her parents had specific times they would talk to each of their kids. Now that they were grown and doing their own thing, it was just a time that everybody could catch up. The kids enjoyed it. The parents enjoyed it. It wasn't something that they tried to get out of. And right, just within a week, Paula would be packing up to move closer to her parents. So you're not going to avoid a phone call from someone or not, not be there for a phone call when they had active plans happening at the moment. She was getting ready to move and leave Valdosta and go to Florida. So during this process, she disappeared and so did Brandon. And on Monday morning, her coworkers who knew that this was not Paula, she did not show up for work. They went to her apartment to look for her and could not find her. They could not find Brandon, but her car was there, and Brandon's car seat was missing. Now we don't know exactly the time frame of when his car seat also came up missing. There are certain details that we can't confirm, but we can say the official report at the end of everything was that his car seat was missing, and it was the only thing that they could find that was missing in this entire situation. All of Paula's belongings, her personal belongings, everything she owned was still present in the apartment. Her purse, you name it, car keys, glasses. She wore glasses. All of it was there, and they have never been found. So if you do have information, you could call the FBI Atlanta field office. You could also send an email, an anonymous email if you want to, or it doesn't have to be anonymous, to findpaulawade@gmail.com. That email address is manned all the time with some great people who know a lot about the case and can make sure the information gets to where it needs to go. So if you're in the Lowndes County area and you know something about this, I know 2002 is a long way to travel back. We believe that we have narrowed it down to Paula had a tannish, like a light brownish, tannish colored blazer, late 90s blazer. So if you happen to see that traveling around that weekend, like I said, it's a long time to remember back. But if you do happen to remember back and you remember something, please let somebody know, law enforcement or the email address, findpaulawade@gmail.com. It's very easy to remember if you happen to think of something in the future. You can also share their flyer. You can share their social media posts and help spread information about them. If you happen to use a hashtag for them, please use Find Paula and Brandon Wade. That way there the family can also see the information that's being shared. They appreciate everyone's help, and that is the case this week that we're going to highlight for the Valdosta area. We appreciate everybody tuning in. And remember those two faces on the screen. That's Paula and that's little Brandon when he disappeared. And his family talks all the time about how really full of life he was and just how adorable and seemingly intelligent. Just wanted to play ball all the time. Just a normal kid, just a normal boy. And his family would love to find him. Of course, Paula too. It's hard to imagine that after all of this time that Paula may be somewhere. But we also have just seen reports of people who have been missing for 13 years holed up in a hotel room that have been found. Not saying that we want that to be Paula Wade's situation, but we just hope that there can be light and hope on the other end of this. But most of all, an answer as to what did happen to Paula and Brandon Wade. Thank you everyone for tuning in with us, and we will be back for another live next week. It'll be on Saturday night like normal, and we hope to be able to get some videos out in between midweek for everybody and keep up with the ongoing Valdosta news happening. We haven't been able to get out a lot of Valdosta news this week, but that should change this coming week. All right. Thank you, everyone. Everybody have a great night.